Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more stories. I approached the table, and my wife's expression froze, her jaw dropping in shock, leaving her mouth hanging open unattractively. Lucas began to stand, but I held up a hand and said, "No, Lucas, stay seated. As long as you're sitting, you're safe. If you stand up, I'll have no choice but to knock your teeth down your throat, so please, stay where you are." I'd hate to cause a scene here. I'm sorry to interrupt your intimate evening, but I must say this. Sarah, I can't believe you pretended to be sick, just to avoid spending the weekend with me, only to be here with this lowlife. There's no one I despise more than Lucas Toms. But to bring him here, to our special place, the spot where we met, where I proposed to you, and where we've shared so many memories that's truly unbelievable. This used to be a place that meant everything to me, but now it means nothing, just like you. I continued, "On our wedding day you vowed I'll never hurt you, and I'll never do anything to make you stop loving me. Well, you've broken both promises. I'm deeply hurt, and my love for you is melting away faster than ice in a cup of hot coffee. You know me better than anyone." "Sarah, you know how I operate. I assess situations, analyze them, identify the problem, and then find a solution. Well, I've analyzed this situation. You're here with Lucas because you want to date other men. I'm your husband, and I won't let you do that. So, I'm clearly the problem. My solution is to remove myself from the equation. You're free to date whoever you like. I just hope this piece of trash is worth it, Sarah." As I turned to leave, I added, "Lucas, this isn't over between us. I'll be seeing you." I walked briskly to the exit and onto the street, hurrying across Lincoln Street and around the corner to the lobby of the Harborview Hotel. Hidden from sight, I watched as Sarah rushed out of the restaurant and onto the sidewalk in front of Marco's. She scanned the area frantically, trying to find me, but when she couldn't spot me, her shoulders slumped. Defeated, she crossed the street, hailed a taxi, and headed north, likely to our condo just a few blocks away. Despite my anger, I found some satisfaction knowing I had at least ruined her evening with Lucas. It also seemed like she cared enough to leave him in an attempt to find me, though she wouldn't. I lingered a little longer, curious about what Lucas would do next. Soon he exited, hailed a cab, and left in the opposite direction. I decided to stay at the Crescent Hotel for a few days while I figured out what to do with my life. You're probably wondering how things got to this point, so let me explain. My name is Michael Miller, and of course my wife is Sarah. After graduating from Harvard, I landed a job as a software engineer at Apex Tech Innovations, a software development company in New York. The owner, Mark Harris, was my boss, and to be fair, he was a decent one. I rose through the ranks quickly and found a lot of success there. At the second company Christmas party I attended, Mark introduced me to his goddaughter Sarah. She was the daughter of his best friend, and it was clear he had invited them to the party to set me up with her. I'm glad he did. You ever hear of love at first sight? Well, I experienced it. Sarah was the most beautiful woman I had ever seen, witty, funny, and everything I could have imagined in a partner. I was completely smitten, and it didn't take long for us to monopolize each other's time that night. Truthfully, I think she dominated mine as much as I did hers. We hit it off instantly and never looked back. That night was at Marco's, and the restaurant became our special place. Just 3 months later, during a Friday night date at Marco's, I proposed. She jumped into my arms and said yes. We were married soon after, and everything seemed to get better and better. My career thrived, as did hers, and we celebrated many milestones at Marco's. We got married in 2015, and life was perfect until about 8 months ago, when I started sensing the honeymoon phase had ended. I know those feelings don't last forever, but I had hoped they would. At the time, I wasn't entirely sure anything was going on behind my back, but it was hard to ignore the growing feeling that something had shifted, that the romance had faded. Determined to rekindle our connection, I started planning a surprise getaway for the two of us. One of my best friends, Tom Hartley, worked with his father, David, in the software industry, and their company was a client of Mark's. I frequently made business trips to their offices in Chicago, so I arranged my plans around one of those trips. Sarah and I were scheduled to travel to Chicago for a meeting with Tom, David, and their wives, Sophia and Julia. We planned to have dinner together on Friday night, followed by a short business meeting on Sunday morning. After that, I had arranged for Sarah and me to drive to Santa Sofia for a few days alone before returning to New York on Wednesday. I wanted to surprise her with this romantic getaway to reignite our spark, a second honeymoon, if you will. But Sarah wasn't thrilled about the trip. She didn't know about the Santa Sofia part, as it was supposed to be a surprise, but she was already resistant to the idea of going to Chicago. I had to push her a bit to get her to agree. When Friday morning finally arrived, I woke up to find Sarah wasn't in bed. I searched for her and eventually found her asleep in the guest bedroom. I gently asked, "Sarah, are you awake?" She shifted slightly and responded, "Michael, I got sick last night and slipped out of bed to avoid waking you. I'm really unwell and just need to sleep a bit longer." "Can you call my office and let them know I won't be in today?" I did as she asked and left her to rest while I went to work. Around 8 a.m., I called her to check on how she was feeling, and she told me she was still ill. I replied, "Well, I guess I'll have to go to Chicago by myself." Then, when she didn't respond, I hung up and immediately called Tom to let him know I'd be coming alone and asked if they wanted to change any plans. Tom suggested that, since Sarah wasn't coming, they cancel the Chicago trip and instead have the two couples come to New York, meet me Friday night, and spend the day shopping on Fifth Avenue. If Sarah felt better, we could all have dinner Friday evening. I loved the idea, so I told him I'd make hotel reservations at the Harborview for them, and we could meet at Maro's for dinner at 6 p.m. At 2 p.m., I cancelled my flight, the Chicago hotel room, and all the arrangements for a car and the hotel in Santa Sofia. I was disappointed, but what else could I do? By 3 p.m., I called Sarah again to see if she felt well enough to join us for dinner, but the line was busy. Honestly, I got caught up preparing my presentation for Tom and David and forgot to call her back. At 5:30 p.m., as I rushed out the door, I called again, but this time it went to voicemail. I left a message with the evening's plans and took a taxi to meet the Hartleys at Maro's. We were having a cocktail when Tom suddenly looked concerned and said, "Michael, I'm sorry, but this is going to upset you. Sarah just walked into the restaurant with another man. He's behind you, to the left by the wall. I'm so sorry." I slowly turned in my seat, and there she was with another man. And not just any man, it was Lucas Toms, someone I despised. He had once been engaged to my sister Sophia but left her standing at the altar. He showed up 2 days later to tell her he didn't want to marry, and 3 weeks later we saw a marriage license in the paper with another woman's name, followed by a birth announcement 5 months after that. Sophia was devastated, and although I knew she was better off without him, she never fully recovered from the betrayal. So now you understand why I hate him. Back to the present moment, I was beyond shocked. I tried to speak but only stammered. Everyone around me had looks of disbelief, clearly feeling sorry for me. When I finally managed to speak, I said, "Well, isn't that something? Clearly I won't be able to continue this evening with you all. I can't just sit here and pretend I didn't see what we all just witnessed. Please carry on with your night and let's meet for breakfast tomorrow morning at 9:30 a.m. at your hotel's coffee shop. I'll be in better shape by then. Sarah and I definitely won't be joining you for dinner tomorrow, though. I'm sorry. Please forgive me." I hugged the ladies and the men as well. They were, after all, longtime friends, and walked over to my wife's table. I believe Tom followed closely behind to make sure everything would be okay. It wouldn't be, but I appreciated his concern. Now, back to the confrontation. Afterward, I returned to my room at the Crescent and turned off my cell phone while checking in. When I powered it back on, there were multiple messages from Sarah, but like anyone in my situation, I just deleted them all without listening. Just as I erased the final voicemail, my phone rang again. I let it go to voicemail. I didn't want to hear anything she had to say. When it beeped to notify me of the voicemail, I deleted it and switched off my phone again. Sunday morning, I met with Tom and David to discuss our business relationship. I said, "Guys, I believe there are going to be some significant changes in my life, though I'm not sure what exactly they'll be. Could you hold off on signing the new contract that Mark sent over? I need some time to figure things out with my marriage and work, as you know. Mark is Sarah's father's best friend and her godfather. If you can wait, there might be a better deal for you down the line, but if not, I understand. I don't see the harm in going month to month with Mark until my future is more settled. What do you think?" In unison, they replied, "Michael, we'll do as you ask. We're with Mark because of you, and if things change, we'll always be on your side. Let us know what to do and when, and we'll be there for you in any way you need." Tears welled up in my eyes, and I hugged them both. Soon their wives came into the restaurant, signaling it was time to take their husbands off for a shopping spree. Tom's wife Sophia joked, "Come on, dear, your credit card is getting cold." I need to warm it up. Julia, David's wife, chimed in. I hope David's cards are heat-resistant, because we're going to swipe them so many times they might melt. Shopping on Fifth Avenue doesn't happen often. Despite my emotional state, I chuckled. I knew they were just playing with their husbands and trying to cheer me up. I loved them for it. We exchanged hugs before they headed off. I thought about going to the office to get some things done, but figured Mark might be there, and possibly even Sarah, expecting I'd show up. I decided to stay away and go in early on Sunday instead. I spent the rest of Friday afternoon reading a book. The next morning, I went into the office, organized a few things, and worked out my plan for Tuesday. Then, I returned to my hotel and browsed the New York Chronicle for apartment listings. I knew I couldn't stay at the Crescent indefinitely, so I needed to find something else. After identifying a few options, I made calls and set up appointments for Tuesday morning. With that sorted, I settled down to watch some football. On Tuesday morning, I went to see my lawyer, Daniel. He had been my attorney since I arrived in New York, and I asked if he had any issue with representing me in a divorce case. He responded, "God, no, Michael. You can't be serious about divorcing Sarah. You love her more than anyone I've ever seen." I replied, "Daniel, the key word there is love, which is now in the past. I don't love her anymore. If you don't want to represent me, that's fine, but all I ask is that you don't represent Sarah either." He agreed, saying, "I'd rather not represent either of you. I think you should try to work things out, but if you can't or don't want to, then go to Alex Eastman. He's good and will do a solid job for you. But please, at least try." I thanked him for the suggestion, but insisted, "No way, Daniel. We're not working this out. I just don't love her anymore." I met with Alex, who assured me that all the divorce papers would be ready for filing by the end of the day Tuesday, and Sarah would be served the following morning. After that, I headed to my bank and got a cashier's check for half of our savings. I left all the money in our joint checking account to cover bills until the divorce was finalized. Sarah and I had a specific arrangement regarding our finances. We each contributed a set amount every month for household expenses and also put aside money for food, entertainment, and furniture. This fund had grown significantly since we always contributed more than we spent. That's why I left it to cover bills until everything was finalized. We also contributed $600 each month into a savings account for vacations and holidays. I withdrew my 49% of that account. The rest of our earnings were our own to invest and spend as we saw fit, with our investment accounts being completely separate, mine through one broker and hers through another. In fact, I had no idea what her account was worth, and I'm pretty sure she didn't know the value of mine either. The same went for our 401k plans. They were separate, with the only shared knowledge being the amount we each deposited into the checking and savings accounts. I took my cashier's check to a different local bank and opened new accounts for myself, $24,000 in checking and $150,000 in savings. After taking care of a few more financial matters like insurance, I decided it was time to go to the office and deal with work. As soon as I walked in, Hannah, the receptionist, told me Mark wanted to see me immediately. I thought, well, here we go. I knocked on his door, and he called out, "Come in, Michael," and closed the door. The first thing he said was, "I got a call from Sarah." "What the hell is going on?" I explained the whole situation, and he asked, "So what are you going to do now?" I told him, "I'm going to divorce her. What do you think?" Now, I really like Mark, but he can be a bit arrogant, and it didn't take long for that to show. He immediately said, "Oh no, you're not. Michael, you're going to suck it up and work things out with your wife. If you don't, you won't continue working here. Those are your choices. Fix things with Sarah, or I'll fire you." I pretended to be shocked and said, "Mark, are you telling me that the work I've done for you isn't valuable enough to overlook the fact that I'm divorcing Sarah? Haven't I been a good employee? Have I broken any rules or violated company policies?" At this point, I had my phone recording the conversation just in case. He replied, "Michael, you've been great, and you've always followed the rules. You even helped write the company policy, so I know you're a stickler for them. But Sarah is my goddaughter, and unless you work things out with her, I'm firing you. Do you understand?" I knew he was trying to pressure me, but I decided to flip the script and put the pressure back on him. Without smiling, though I wanted to, I said with a sorrowful tone, "Then you'll have to say the words, Mark, because I'm divorcing her." He looked surprised and disappointed, but finally said, "Michael, you're fired." I asked him to have security escort me to my office so I could pack up my few belongings. I had already taken a few things on Sunday, suspecting this might happen, as I knew Mark well from our long working relationship. When I got to my now former office, there were just a few things left that I wanted, so I packed them into a small box I'd grabbed from the storage room. As I was about to leave, Mark pointed to a picture and asked, "What about this one?" It was a photo of Sarah and me on our wedding day. She looked stunning in her wedding dress, and I have to admit, I didn't look too bad in my tuxedo either. A wave of sadness hit me, and tears welled up. I said, "Oh yes, I always loved this frame." I took the picture out, tossed it into the trash, and placed the frame in my box. As I turned to leave, there was Sarah, standing at the door with tears running down her face. She had obviously seen me discard the wedding photo and realized what that meant. In a soft voice she asked, "Michael, can we talk?" I paused only slightly before saying, "There's nothing left to discuss, Sarah. You've already cheated on me or were planning to. You broke both of the promises you made to me on our wedding day. You hurt me deeply and shattered my heart. And you did something that made me stop loving you. You know as well as I do that you can't unbreak a heart. Do you really think I can move past you cheating on me, especially with Lucas, knowing how much I despise him after what he did to Barb? There's no way we can make this work. No, Sarah." There's nothing more to say. I walked out, leaving both my job and Sarah behind. I called Tom and told him that Sarah and I were getting a divorce, and that I had been fired from Apex Tech Innovations because of it. I explained that I was working on a new system security program that would surpass what Titan was currently offering, but that I needed a couple of months to finalize it. I asked if he'd be willing to continue on a month-to-month basis with Titan until I could launch the new program. For the last 2 years, Mark hadn't allowed me to do any programming as part of my job, keeping me busy with system maintenance and customer service instead. As a result, I'd been writing code in my spare time and had nearly finished the new system. If I hadn't been fired, I would have leased the program to Mark after showing him the improvements over his current system, but now I was free to market it myself. Tom said he'd have to check with his father before giving a final answer, but he was confident they'd be willing to give me the time I needed to complete it, pending their evaluation, of course. 4 days later, I moved out of the hotel and into a lovely apartment. Though the rent was high, I had enough savings to cover it for a few months. After the move, I spent 8 to 11 hours a day writing and testing code. I knew I could have it ready for the market soon, but I was determined to finish and move on with my life. During that period, Sarah was served divorce papers, and she called me repeatedly, wanting to discuss things. I listened to her voicemails, but nothing she said seemed important enough to respond to. She said, "Michael, I admit I probably would have slept with Lucas if you hadn't intervened, but I never did. I don't know what I was thinking, but I love you. Please call me." She also said, "Michael, I love you. I don't want a divorce. Please call me." She continued, "Michael, can't you forgive me and stay married to me? And again, Michael, I miss you." I was fed up, so I contacted Alex and asked him to tell Sarah's lawyer that if she didn't stop, I'd seek a restraining order. Soon after, Sarah left another message, "Michael, I love you, and I want nothing more than to end this and spend the rest of my life loving you. I can't believe you'd get a restraining order, but if you feel it's necessary, go ahead. This will be my final message. I want you more than anything. But the decision is yours. I'm sorry I hurt you so badly that you won't even speak to me. I love you, honey. Call me anytime." True to her word, I heard nothing more from her. The effect wasn't what I anticipated. It felt like the final blow to our marriage, even though the divorce wasn't final yet. It made me sad. 3 weeks flew by as I spent long hours working on my projects. On a Friday afternoon, just after lunch, Alex called to inform me we had a court hearing scheduled for the following Wednesday morning with Judge Anna Robertson. He said this wasn't good news because she was known for being against divorce and making couples jump through hoops before granting one, if she granted it at all. When we got to the courtroom, Sarah and her lawyer were already there, and our case was called quickly. Once seated, the bailiff called the court to order. All rise, and we stood. Judge Caldwell entered, sat, and welcomed us. She turned to me and asked, "As the petitioner in this divorce case, I'm asking if you drop this action and work on your marriage." I responded, "No, Your Honor, I want to proceed." I knew trouble was brewing when she frowned, but said, "Very well." She then turned to Sarah and asked, "Mrs. Miller, do you agree with this divorce, or do you want to work on your marriage?" Without hesitation, Sarah replied, "Your Honor, I absolutely do not want a divorce. I love my husband and want nothing more than to save our marriage." Judge Caldwell continued, "Mr. Miller, I've reviewed your petition, noting that you're filing on irreconcilable differences and your settlement proposal is notably fair. I see no signs of bitterness, which is uncommon from a petitioner. Can you explain that?" I replied, "Your Honor, I don't hate her or wish her harm. I just don't want to be married to her anymore because I no longer love her." Sarah gasped at my words, and I heard a faint sob. The judge said, "I believe you two can resolve your issues with the right help. I'm ordering marriage counseling with a qualified counselor. You'll have 3 joint sessions, followed by 3 individual sessions each. And then 2 more joint sessions. The only exception will be if the counselor advises that the marriage can't be saved." She banged her gavel and called for the next case. I wanted to object, but Alex held my arm and said, "Michael, just go to the first session and see how you feel. If you're still sure, tell the counselor you want out." Counseling was a disaster. Sarah cried, apologized, and begged me to stop the divorce and fix our marriage. The counselor listened to me, but didn't seem supportive of my decision to end the marriage. He asked, "Michael, why won't you consider working on your marriage?" I responded, "Dr. Stevens, let me tell you a story. It may sound like a fairy tale, but it's true. At my company's Christmas party, I saw a girl across the room. Ever heard of love at first sight? That's what it was for me. My boss introduced me to his goddaughter, Sarah. And I knew immediately she was the one I wanted to spend my life with." I glanced at Sarah, who was smiling, no longer the sad, tearful woman she had been moments earlier. She was perfect for me, and apparently I was perfect for her too. It wasn't long before we were deeply involved, and 4 months later I proposed. We never looked back. I thought we were perfect. I paused, nearly on the verge of a sob, but holding it back. It was love at first sight, Dr. Stevens. It wasn't something that developed over time, it happened in an instant. If one can fall in love so quickly, it's not hard to imagine that one can also fall out of love just as fast. Sarah went on a date with another man. She claims she never slept with him. And I believe her, but if I hadn't intervened, there's a good chance she would have. She cheated on our marriage whether or not there was sex. A date with another man is cheating. To make it worse, that man was Lucas, my worst enemy. It wasn't just anyone. She knew how much I despised him. She knew the full story of how Lucas had hurt my sister, Sophia. Yet he's the one she chose to betray me with. To add insult to injury, they went to the most significant place in our relationship. The place where we met, the spot where I proposed to her, where we spent countless happy moments, and the location where I dreamed we'd celebrate her first pregnancy if it happened. It was also where I envisioned we'd celebrate the birth of our first child, and so on. But when I saw her sitting with Lucas, saw him touch her face, saw them clinking glasses in a toast, and noticed the smile on her face, my heart broke. The woman I loved was betraying me with my worst enemy. My heart started to crack, and by the time I reached their table, it was half empty. By the time I walked out of the restaurant, it was gone. No more love remained for the woman who had been my world. All of it had drained away. Now, Doc, do you understand why I don't want to stay married to her? There's no love left, and I don't want to remain in a relationship without love. I can't make it any clearer than that, can I? Sarah was openly crying by this point, and while I felt bad for her, it didn't change anything. I didn't love her anymore, and I needed out of the marriage. I turned to her and said, "Sarah, I'm sorry. I don't want to hurt you, but can't you see my perspective? You wouldn't want to stay married to me if I didn't love you, and I don't." Dr. Stevens then said, "Well, that's all the time we have for today, but I think we've laid everything on the table. I'm confident we can make progress with individual counseling, and I have high hopes that we can reconnect you two." By this time, I was furious. After all I'd said, he still believed there was a chance for the marriage to survive. I stood up and said, "You must be out of your mind if you think I'll attend any more counseling. Have your sessions with Sarah if you want, but I'm done." I stormed out of the office, thinking to myself, how could anyone be so clueless? 2 days later, I received a letter from the court with 3 scheduled dates for individual counseling sessions. Needless to say, when the first one came and went without me showing up, I was escorted to the courthouse, brought before the judge, and held in contempt of court. Judge Caldwell fined me $600 and warned me that if I missed the next session, I'd be jailed. I told her, then you'll have to put me in jail because I'm not going to any more counseling, and that's exactly what happened. I skipped the next session, and 2 hours after my scheduled time, a police officer knocked on my door and took me to New York County Jail. What a charming place, I must say. My attorney visited me daily, trying to convince me to go to the counseling, but I refused. On the third day, I had another visitor, my former boss, Mark. He was allowed a brief 14-minute visit and said, "Michael, I'm sorry you're going through this, and I regret how I treated you. I should have been more supportive when you were struggling. I think I have a way to help you. But I need you to give me a chance to work through it with you. If you agree to the individual counseling, Judge Caldwell will release you from jail, and afterward, you and I can go over my plan to resolve your situation. All I ask is that you consider coming back to work for me when it's all over. No promises, just think about it for the first time in a while." I actually felt a glimmer of hope. Mark had always been a good friend and treated me fairly before all this blew up with Sarah. I agreed to do as he suggested and promised to think about returning to work at Apex Tech Innovations. The judge scheduled my first individual session for the next day, and I was escorted home by an officer who waited while I showered, shaved, and got ready for the appointment. He then took me to the session and waited until it was over. As expected, the session was full of the usual psychological digging. I cooperated as much as I could. When it ended, Dr. Stevens walked me out and informed the officer Mr. Miller was very cooperative and has agreed to attend his next session a week from today. The officer replied, "Very well. Mr. Miller, you're free to go. But let me warn you, if you skip next week's session, you'll be back before Judge Caldwell, and trust me, you don't want to be in front of her again. She's one tough woman when she's angry." I called Mark and arranged to meet him at my apartment the following day. We spent the entire morning going over his plan, making all the necessary preparations to achieve what we wanted. Afterward, we had lunch and continued discussing my potential return to Apex Tech Innovations. I told him, "Mark, I've always respected you, and you've been a good friend, but I need to do what's right for me. I don't know if you remember, but after my last promotion, you ordered me to stop doing any programming. You said I was too valuable as a systems maintenance manager and customer relations manager to get involved in coding. But I love writing code, Mark, so I've been developing a new security program that's 4 generations ahead of anything on the market. It will revolutionize system security and make hacking virtually impossible. I'm just a couple of months away from testing it on real company data, and I estimate the program will be ready to launch in 3 or 4 months." Mark nodded. "You've got David and Tom lined up to test it, right?" I smiled and said, "You're sharp as always, Mark." "Yes, they've agreed to test it because of my personal relationship with Tom. In fact, if my program works, they'll likely leave you for me." Mark sighed. "I know you're right. But how do you plan to get around the non-compete clause in your contract?" I replied. "The non-compete only applies if I quit or was fired for cause, and neither is true. You fired me because I refused to work on my marriage, so there's no issue with the clause." He grinned slyly and said, "Not to cause trouble, because I want you to come back, but I could have easily fabricated a work-related reason to justify firing you." I laughed, and he gave me a sharp look, clearly annoyed. "Mark," I said, "I recorded our conversation when you fired me. I specifically asked if my termination had anything to do with work, and you said no, that it was entirely about Sarah. I have it all on tape." His expression changed. "Why did you feel the need to record that conversation, Michael?" "Because, Mark, I know you. I knew how much you cared for Sarah, and I was sure you'd try everything to stop me from divorcing her." "All right, fair enough." I continued, "I'm planning to make a fortune with this new software, and I'm willing to share that success with you, Mark. Under specific conditions, I might return to work for you full-time. My role can stay the same, focusing on customer relations. But I will not take on system maintenance tasks. You'll need to hire a manager for that, who should report directly to me, as their work will be closely tied to the new program. Assuming you're on board, which I'm sure you will be thrilled with, I'll spend the rest of my time, around 39 hours, on program development. Even though I'll be employed full-time with you and paid to develop the program and future projects, the ownership of the program and any others will stay with me. In return, I'll give you an exclusive license to market my programs with a fixed royalty percentage paid to me. I know this is bold, Mark, but once you see what I'm working on, you'll be pleased with the deal. We're going to make a fortune." A true businessman, Mark agreed to every term of the offer and said he'd have the company's lawyer get in touch with me to finalize the contract. He made it clear, though, that if things didn't work out as planned, he could still let me go. He requested a slight increase in the royalty percentage in that case. The next scheduled counseling session passed without my attendance. As promised, the officer knocked on my door and took me to the courthouse in handcuffs this time. With a smirk, he said, "Told you, buddy, this time you're in trouble." When Judge Caldwell entered the courtroom, I noticed her face turn several shades of bright red, with what seemed like smoke coming from her nostrils and fire in her eyes. Yeah, as I suspected, she was furious. "Well, Mr. Miller, it seems you've done it again. I find you in contempt of court and sentence you to 29 days in jail." Sarah was there for reasons I couldn't understand, and she suddenly cried out, "No, Your Honor, please don't do that to Michael. I withdraw my opposition to his divorce request. Please grant it and don't send him to jail again." I think spit flew from her mouth when Judge Caldwell replied, "Too late for that, honey. He's going to jail, period." At that moment, I stood up and shouted, "Your Honor, I'd like to approach the bench." She shot me a glare and snapped, "You're not allowed to speak to me directly. That's why you have a lawyer." I turned to Alex and said, "Alex Eastman, you're fired. Now, Your Honor, I'll be representing myself and would like to approach the bench." I moved forward, along with Sarah's attorney. "What is it, Mr. Miller?" she asked. "Your Honor, I'd like to request a brief meeting in your chambers to settle this entire case. I'm confident that if we have this discussion, everything will be resolved to everyone's satisfaction." "Very well, counselors, we'll meet in my chambers in 8 minutes. I declare a short recess." The gavel came down. Once we gathered in her office, I asked for the meeting to be off the record. She shook her head, about to speak when I interrupted. "Your Honor, I have reasons to believe there are matters neither you nor Sarah's attorney would want on public record, so I ask once more that this be off the record." She stared at me for a long moment, then nodded and instructed the court recorder to leave the room. "All right, Mr. Miller, it's your turn. Let's hear it." "First of all, Your Honor, I have no desire for anyone to be hurt further in these proceedings. I believe there has been judicial misconduct here. I don't want to harm you. I don't want to see your marriage fall apart. Nor do I wish for Sarah's parents' marriage to suffer. I certainly don't want Sarah to be hurt. I no longer love her and don't want to stay married, but I also don't want her world to collapse. You've probably already figured out that I have evidence of your affair with Sarah's father, which would require you to recuse yourself from this case. The evidence is undeniable and rather explicit, I might add. I could present it here for you and the opposing counsel if needed, but I'd prefer not to. Furthermore, if forced, I'd submit it to the Judicial Review Board, though I don't wish to do that either. As I mentioned, I don't want anyone to suffer. Sarah would be crushed, and I doubt either of your marriages would survive. I just don't want to hurt anyone. All I wanted was my divorce." I glanced over at Sarah's lawyer to gauge his reaction. "What do you think?" I asked. He looked over at Judge Caldwell and replied, "Your Honor, I've always admired you for not giving up on marriages that could still be saved. You've been quite tough at times, excuse my bluntness, but I've always understood why, if Mr. Miller's evidence holds up. I'd be deeply disappointed by your affair, and even more so that you didn't step away from this case. However, like him, I don't want to see you hurt. I believe you should grant him the divorce." Turning to me, he said, "Mr. Miller, all I ask is that you sit with Sarah for a short while and let her express herself. You told the counselor that your heart was shattered, and I get that, but know that hers is too. Just give her a few minutes of your time. Your Honor, none of this has to leave this room if you grant the divorce." Upon returning to the courtroom, the judge granted the divorce and agreed to the property settlement as presented. We each retained our investment accounts, 401 Kansas and 49% of our savings. It was determined that the joint expense account would cover all outstanding bills up to and after the finalization of the divorce, remaining under Sarah's management. Sarah would keep the condo and live there rent-free for as long as she wanted, but if she sold it, the net proceeds would be split evenly between us. The judge reversed her earlier ruling of 29 days in jail, instead imposing a fine of $600, which I gladly paid. I realized she needed to maintain her dignity to avoid any unwanted attention on the case, and no one wanted that. As promised, I sat down with Sarah in a private room next to the courtroom. She apologized again, admitting she didn't understand why she acted the way she did. She mentioned she would continue seeing her counselor until she figured it out and reassured me that she would always love me, pleading for my forgiveness. I do forgive you, Sarah, and I don't hate you. I just don't love you anymore." I gave her a hug and left the room, hearing her sobbing as I walked down the hallway. The following 6 weeks were spent focused on developing a new security program, which was nearly ready for implementation on Tom and David's system. About a week before I was set to travel to Chicago, Sarah called me. "Michael, I've decided to sell the condo, and I've received an offer for $620,000. I didn't want to sell it to someone else before offering it to you first. You can pay me $280,000, and I'll turn down the other offer. What do you think?" I replied, "First, I don't want the condo. You can sell it and have my share sent to my attorney, payable to me. He'll handle all the necessary paperwork and make sure the funds reach my account. But why are you selling it?" She explained, "I'm selling it because I'm leaving town. I've accepted a new job and won't be living here anymore." She then shared that she had learned about her father and the judge, and though she knew I hadn't wanted to hurt anyone, it still pained her. She added that she needed a fresh start. I wished her well in her new job and said goodbye. 2 weeks later, I walked into Tom and David's company with my security software ready for the testing phase and live implementation. Tom greeted me warmly with a big hug, expressing their excitement to get started. "Michael, let me introduce you to our IT administrator," he said, and there stood Sarah. I glanced at Tom and asked, "What's going on?" He smiled and said, "Sarah is our new IT administrator. You know how talented she is, and I'm sure you'll work well together on the security package." I was taken aback, but kept my composure. I told him I'll need a computer workstation to prepare a few things today. I'll work with Sarah briefly, but mostly I'll focus on getting the package ready for installation. I requested the computer have internet access. Once I calmed down, I must admit the day was actually pleasant. I had always seen Sarah as witty, intelligent, funny, and beautiful. None of that had changed. In fact, it was a rather enjoyable day. I had also always viewed Sarah as not only my wife and lover but my best friend, so we got along well throughout the day. It was clear that Sarah was doing everything she could to stay close to me, to interact with me, and yes, to occasionally and subtly touch me. It was starting to have an impact. Like I said, I had always seen Sarah as my closest friend, and truthfully I missed her. At 5:29 p.m. we said goodbye with "I'll see you tomorrow" and parted ways. Sitting in my hotel room later, I did a lot of reflecting and decided to take a bold step. I logged onto my laptop and accessed the company's computer system. As you know, programmers often leave a back door in their systems, just in case we need access later. I used that to get into the personnel files and found Sarah's address. I stopped by a wine store, picked up her favorite bottle of wine, and drove to her apartment. The doorman asked whom I was visiting and if she was expecting me. I told him, "I'm here to see Sarah Miller," and no, she isn't expecting me. He tried calling her apartment, but there was no answer. Figuring she might be out for dinner, I asked if I could wait. He said it was fine and directed me to a small lounge near the lobby. Not long after, I saw Sarah come through the door with a man by her side. As they reached the elevator, the man hugged and kissed her on the cheek. Just then, the doorman seemed to realize who I was waiting for and walked over to them. He said something to Sarah and pointed in my direction. I began walking toward them and heard Sarah say, "Oh no, please, no." I said, "Well, here we are again, Sarah. It seems I'm always interrupting your dates." I apologized, admitting I had no right to show up unannounced, but added, "I'm glad I did." I handed the bottle of wine to the man and said, "You two enjoy your evening," before turning to leave. Sarah ran after me, begging, "Michael, please don't go, don't leave me again," but I did. Back at my hotel, I sent Sarah an email through the company system. I wrote, "Sarah, when I walked into Tom's office, I was shocked to see you there. It didn't take long for me to figure out that you must have quit your job, sold the condo, and moved to Chicago to work for David and Tom so you could be near me. Maybe I'm full of myself. But I assumed you did this hoping we could reconnect. I imagine Mark had a lot to do with telling you where I'd be and what I was working on, which doesn't surprise me but definitely annoys me. In truth, I was happy to see you. I've missed you. Since we were good friends, I enjoyed spending time with you today so much that I decided to bring over a bottle of wine so we could continue talking outside the office. But seeing you with another man left me confused. You went through all this effort to be near me, yet you've already gotten close to someone else. I can only think of 2 reasons for that. Either you're not really interested in getting back together, or you think it's okay to be with me and date other men at the same time. Either way, I'm done. Honestly, I've been doubting whether divorcing you was the right decision, but your actions today reassured me that I made the right call. What frustrates me is how close I came to being a fool again, thinking you cared about me. You don't. You care about yourself. I hope someday you find what truly makes you happy. The last thing I want to say is this: don't try to contact me again. As far as you're concerned, I don't exist. Have a good life, Sarah. Then I sent her a second email regarding the software installation. Sarah, attached is a file with full instructions on how to activate the security software. There's a 2-word password required to access both the file and the system. I'll let you figure out what the words are, but if you think back to the last time we were at Marcos, it should come to you easily. If not, maybe Tom can help. Since he heard them too, the password was broken promise is a reminder of how she treated our marriage. Every time she accessed the system, she would remember. I had already installed the package on the server, so all that was left was for her to activate it and set up user access codes. The instructions covered everything. If any issues came up, she could contact Mark, as I wouldn't be working with the company anymore. I wished her luck. Some men, after divorcing a cheating wife, end up finding someone younger, more attractive, smarter, and more loyal, a woman who would love him deeply and never betray him. That was Sarah before she broke our marriage vows. Afterward, she wasn't. I never found that ideal woman. In fact, after resigning from Apex Tech Innovations, I fell into a depression. Sure, I continued to receive large amounts of money from royalties on the security package, thanks to Mark's marketing, but it didn't matter to me anymore. I was in a place I'd never been unsure of myself. I'd always been confident, so this was new territory. I knew I had a problem, so I began seeing a counselor. After several sessions, I started to feel better. No, it wasn't Dr. Stevens, but I kept going for a while, confident I was back on track. I dated occasionally, but nothing serious. With money still coming in and my life improving, I decided to just take things as they came before even thinking about love again. And that's where this emotional journey ends. What would you have done if you were in Michael's shoes? Could you forgive someone who hurt you like that, or would you walk away forever? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more. See you next time.